There is a widely accepted belief about global power. The belief is simple. Wars reshape the world through military strength. Armies move, missiles launch, territory changes, and eventually the war ends. History textbooks often frame conflict this way. Battles redraw borders, victories reshape alliances, defeats collapse governments. But history suggests something quieter often happens beneath the surface. The real changes do not always occur on the battlefield. They occur inside systems, financial systems, trade systems, energy systems, the infrastructure that moves money around the world. For decades, the global economy has revolved around one central assumption, that the US dollar sits at the center of global finance. Energy is priced in it, trade is settled in it, central banks store reserves in it. Because of this structure, many people assume something else. They assume military power reinforces the financial system, that war strengthens the existing order. It feels logical. The largest military power also issues the dominant currency. The two appear connected. Military strength protects economic power. Economic influence supports military reach. But the relationship between conflict and financial systems is not always so direct. Sometimes war strengthens the existing structure, but sometimes it produces a different effect. Sometimes geopolitical pressure encourages countries to quietly redesign the infrastructure beneath global finance, and when that process begins, it rarely announces itself. There are no dramatic declarations, no sudden revolutions. It unfolds gradually, transaction by transaction, payment system by payment system, because global finance does not run on currency alone. It runs on networks, payment rails, settlement systems, and financial messaging infrastructure. Today, most international transactions still move through one dominant network, a system connecting banks through a global financial messaging platform known as SWIFT. But in recent years, several major economies have begun exploring alternatives, not necessarily replacing the dollar, but building parallel systems alongside it. Systems that could allow trade to move through different financial pathways. China, Russia, India, Brazil, members of the economic alliance known as BRICS. Some are developing digital currencies. Others are building domestic payment networks. Some are experimenting with cross-border settlement platforms, designed to operate outside traditional financial infrastructure. At first glance, these efforts appear technical, small adjustments inside financial plumbing. But infrastructure determines how power flows through global systems. And when alternative financial networks begin to appear, the structure of global finance can slowly begin to change, which raises a different question. Not whether the dollar disappears, but whether the system around it begins to evolve, because the most important shifts in global power rarely begin with dramatic announcements. They begin quietly, inside the architecture of money itself, and that is where the story begins. To understand why this shift matters, it helps to step back from current events. International trade has always faced a simple challenge: distance. A company in one country sells goods. A buyer in another country pays for them. But their banks may operate under different currencies, different financial regulations, different banking systems. Historically, intermediaries solved this problem. Banks trusted other banks. Central banks coordinated currency markets. Financial networks transmitted payment instructions across borders. Over time, a global infrastructure emerged to support this system. At the center of that infrastructure sits a financial messaging network known as the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Most people simply call it SWIFT. SWIFT does not move money itself. Instead, it sends secure financial messages between banks. These messages confirm payment instructions. They tell one bank that another bank has agreed to transfer funds. The money moves through separate settlement systems, but the message creates trust. Without it, banks would struggle to verify international transactions. Over the decades, SWIFT became deeply embedded in global finance. Thousands of banks rely on it. Most cross-border transactions depend on it, and global trade flows through the network every day. But when a system becomes central, it also becomes strategic. Access to the network becomes important, because if a bank cannot send messages through the system, its ability to conduct international transactions becomes limited. Trade does not necessarily stop, but it becomes slower, more complicated, more uncertain. And once financial infrastructure reaches that level of influence, another predictable process begins. Countries begin building alternatives, not necessarily to replace the existing system, but to reduce dependence on it. This is where the story begins to change. In recent years, several large emerging economies have begun developing alternative financial infrastructure. Much of this activity is taking place within the economic alliance known as BRICS. BRICS originally brought together 5 major economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Together, these countries represent a large share of global population and industrial output. But BRICS has gradually evolved beyond a diplomatic forum. It has also become a platform for financial experimentation. One area of focus involves digital currencies issued by central banks. China has developed a digital version of its national currency through the People's Bank of China. Russia is developing a digital ruble through the Central Bank of Russia. India has begun testing a digital rupee through the Reserve Bank of India. Each project explores how digital currency could function within domestic financial systems. But policymakers are now discussing something broader, connecting those systems. Russian financial official Anatoly Aksakov recently suggested that payment platforms in Russia, China, and India could eventually integrate. Under this model, digital currencies could convert automatically within shared settlement networks. A digital ruble could convert into digital yuan, a digital yuan into digital rupee. The transaction would occur within interconnected digital infrastructure rather than passing through multiple intermediary banks. In theory, payments could move across borders while remaining inside domestic financial systems. This idea connects to a broader initiative often referred to as BRICS Pay. BRICS Pay is envisioned as a cross-border payment network, linking domestic financial platforms across BRICS economies. Instead of routing transactions through Western-dominated messaging systems like SWIFT, the network would connect existing national payment systems. Russia could link its SPFS financial messaging system. China could connect its CIPS cross-border payment network. India could integrate its unified payments interface. Brazil could incorporate its instant payment platform known as PIX. Together, these platforms could form a new financial architecture, one capable of processing international transactions without relying entirely on traditional messaging infrastructure. Supporters argue that such systems could allow countries to settle trade directly in national currencies. Energy exports, commodity trade, manufacturing supply chains, all processed through interconnected domestic networks. This does not remove the dollar from global finance, but it introduces something new: alternative payment rails. And when alternative rails exist, financial behavior can slowly change. Institutions experiment, trade flows diversify, payment systems evolve. This becomes important later because financial systems rarely change through sudden disruption. They change through gradual diversification. Recent geopolitical events have accelerated interest in these alternative systems. One moment that drew attention occurred after Western governments froze a significant portion of Russian foreign currency reserves following the invasion of Ukraine. The decision demonstrated something important. Financial infrastructure could be used as an instrument of policy. For many countries observing the event, a new question emerged. If access to financial networks can be restricted during geopolitical conflict, what happens if a country loses access to those networks? That question encouraged some governments to explore alternatives. Russia expanded its domestic financial messaging systems. China accelerated development of cross-border Yuan settlement platforms. India experimented with rupee-based trade agreements. Brazil explored regional payment networks across South America. These efforts differ in structure. They use different technologies. They serve different national interests. But they share a similar objective: reducing reliance on a single global financial pathway. At the same time, policymakers in the United States have signaled concern about potential alternatives to the dollar-based system. Political leaders have suggested that countries attempting to undermine the dollar could face trade consequences. These discussions reveal how financial infrastructure has become a strategic issue, not only economic, but geopolitical. Yet the idea of a single BRICS currency has largely faded. Creating a unified currency across diverse economies is extremely complex. Instead, the emerging strategy appears more gradual, more practical: expanding trade in national currencies, strengthening domestic payment systems, connecting those systems through interoperable financial networks. In other words, building parallel infrastructure, step by step. Today, the US dollar still holds a central position in global finance. International trade continues to rely heavily on it. Financial markets remain deeply connected to dollar liquidity, and global institutions still depend on established payment networks. None of that is changing overnight. But something subtle is happening beneath the surface. Alternative settlement systems are being constructed. Domestic payment networks are expanding. Digital currencies are being tested by central banks. Trade agreements are experimenting with non-dollar settlement. Each development appears small on its own: a technical adjustment, a regional experiment, a pilot project within a banking system. But financial systems rarely transform through dramatic events. They transform when enough alternative pathways exist that participants begin choosing between them, not necessarily out of opposition, but out of convenience, or efficiency, or precaution. If that process continues, the global financial architecture may gradually become more distributed: multiple payment networks, multiple settlement systems, multiple currencies participating in global trade. The dollar may remain an important pillar of this system, but it may operate within a broader network of financial infrastructures. And once financial infrastructure becomes multipolar, the structure of global economic influence begins to shift, quietly, gradually, often without headlines. Because in global finance, currencies attract attention, but infrastructure determines power, which raises one final question. If new financial networks continue expanding across emerging economies, and digital settlement systems begin linking those networks together, what happens when global trade no longer depends on a single financial pathway? That question may define the next chapter of the global financial system, and the answer is still unfolding.